In 1859, a respected London woman named Mrs. Whitmore went to her doctor with a list of problems: worry, trouble sleeping, crankiness, and what she politely called nervous episodes. Her doctor, following the best medical practice of that time, said she had hysteria and gave her a treatment that would make modern medical boards take away his license immediately. He placed her on an examination table and manually touched her private parts until she experienced what he wrote down in his notes as hysterical paroxysm. This wasn't some fake doctor in a back alley. This was normal medical practice done by respected doctors in the best clinics in Europe and America. For over 2,000 years, doctors had been treating women for hysteria, a diagnosis used for everything that supposedly came from a wandering womb. By the Victorian time period, this treatment had turned into something that would seem absolutely weird to us today. Doctors were literally giving women orgasms as medical therapy, and they had no idea that's what they were doing. This is the jaw-dropping, true story of how Victorian people were so uncomfortable with sex that doctors invented vibrators to save their aching hands from treating hundreds of hysterical women, all while staying completely clueless about what they were actually doing. But before we dive deeper into how Victorian doctors turned this ancient Greek nonsense into a huge medical business, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because in our next video, I'm revealing how Victorian women literally poisoned themselves with arsenic wafers, lead face paint, and mercury makeup just to get that sick-looking pale appearance. Trust me, you'll never complain about modern makeup again. Now let's get back to how doctors went from believing in wandering wombs to accidentally inventing the vibrator. The idea of hysteria goes back to ancient Egypt, but it was the Greek doctor Hippocrates who gave it its name. Hysteria meant uterus in Greek, and doctors believed that women's wombs could literally wander around their bodies, causing symptoms. Plato described the uterus as an animal within an animal desperate to have children. If a woman stayed childless too long, her womb would supposedly drift through her body, pressing on organs and causing everything from worry to fainting spells. The suggested cure was marriage and pregnancy to satisfy the restless organ. By the Renaissance, doctors had stopped believing in the wandering womb theory, but kept the diagnosis. The symptoms of hysteria grew to include practically anything that troubled a woman: nervousness, trouble sleeping, muscle spasms, shortness of breath, loss of appetite, crankiness, depression, sexually forward behavior, sexually shy behavior, and a tendency to cause trouble. Basically, if a woman wasn't perfectly obedient and happy, she was probably hysterical. The English doctor Thomas Sydenham guessed that hysteria was the most common disease after fever, affecting a quarter of all women. Victorian medical theory said that women were naturally more delicate and nervous than men. Their reproductive systems supposedly controlled their entire body, making them likely to have mental and physical weakness. Dr. William Acton, a well-known Victorian doctor, famously wrote in 1857 that the majority of women, happily for them, are not very much troubled with sexual feeling of any kind. This widespread belief that respectable women had no sexual desires whatsoever created a massive blind spot in medical practice. So when women came to doctors with symptoms of sexual frustration, though neither doctor nor patient would have used that term, doctors saw only disease. The treatment that developed was pelvic massage to cause hysterical paroxysm, what we now recognize as orgasm. But Victorian doctors described it in purely medical terms. Dr. Nathaniel Highmore wrote in 1660 about the treatment, causing that the sick woman would experience violent tightening and relaxing of the muscles along with flushing of the face and a feeling of relief from symptoms. Here's how the treatment actually worked. The woman would visit her doctor's office, often weekly. She would lie on an examination table, partially undressed, but covered by a sheet for modesty. The doctor would apply scented oils, usually lavender or rose, and begin massaging the vulva with a circular motion. Medical textbooks said to continue until the patient experienced paroxysm, described as sudden muscle tightening, flushed skin, and lots of vaginal lubrication followed by deep relaxation. Dr. Russell Trawl wrote in 1903 that achieving hysterical paroxysm could take over an hour and complained that it was the most boring and demanding of medical procedures. Doctors genuinely saw this as a chore. There was nothing sexual about it in their minds. They were simply causing a medical crisis to relieve symptoms. It was as medical to them as setting a broken bone. One doctor wrote that treating hysteria patients was hard work for the doctor, requiring 1 to 1.5 hours of the doctor's time. The treatment was extremely common. By the late 1800s, doctors estimated that up to 75% of American women suffered from hysteria. In major cities, some doctors specialized only in hysteria treatment, seeing dozens of women daily. Dr. Taylor's practice in New York advertised complete relief from nervous exhaustion and female troubles, and employed multiple doctors to keep up with demand. Appointment books from that time show women scheduling regular weekly or twice-a-month sessions, often for years. Not all treatments happened in doctors' offices. Wealthy women could have doctors make house calls for private treatment, but the most popular solution was hydrotherapy at specialized clinics. The water cure involved directing high-pressure water jets at the genitals while the patient sat on specially designed chairs. European spas like Bath in England and Baden-Baden in Germany became well known for their hysteria treatments. Women would spend weeks taking the waters, receiving multiple treatments daily. Rachel Maines, in her groundbreaking book, The Technology of Orgasm, wrote about how these water treatments worked. Patients sat on chairs with cutout seats while attendants directed powerful water streams at their genitals. The French called it la douche pelvienne, the pelvic shower. One Baden-Baden advertisement from 1875 promised complete restoration of feminine vitality through the scientific application of thermal waters. Women reported feeling energized and restored to full health after treatment courses. By the 1880s, Dr. Joseph Mortimer Granville had a problem. His hand was cramping from treating too many hysteria patients. Manual pelvic massage was exhausting work, especially with some women needing over an hour to achieve paroxysm. His solution would completely change hysteria treatment, the first electric vibrator. Granville's percussor used an electric motor to create rapid vibrations, reducing treatment time from an hour to minutes. He insisted his device was only for treating male muscle disorders, but other doctors quickly started using it for hysteria. Within a decade, dozens of vibrator models flooded the medical market. The Weiss Company catalog from 1906 offered over 20 different models. Advertisements in medical journals bragged about efficiency. The Chattanooga vibrator relieves hysteria symptoms in under 10 minutes. By 1900, vibrators were the fifth most common electrical appliance in American homes, appearing in household catalogs alongside toasters and sewing machines. The 1908 Sears catalog advertised a home vibrator as very useful and satisfactory for home service. The advertisements were remarkably clear while remaining medically proper. One 1910 ad showed a woman using a vibrator on her face with text reading, "Vibration is life." The secret of the ages has been discovered in vibration. Great scientists tell us that we owe not only our health, but even our life strength to this wonderful force. The White Cross electric vibrator brings the essence of life itself to your very door. But here's the truly amazing part. Nobody involved understood the sexual nature of these treatments. Doctors wrote detailed medical papers about causing hysterical paroxysm without ever connecting it to sexual climax. Why? Because Victorian medical education completely left out female sexuality. Medical textbooks taught that women's reproductive organs existed only for having babies. The clitoris was barely mentioned, if at all. Many anatomy texts simply labeled it as a small, leftover organ of no particular function. The deliberate ignorance was huge. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, yes, the serial inventor, ran a health center where he treated hysteria with vibrators while at the same time crusading against masturbation as a dangerous evil. He never made the connection. Doctors would spend their days giving women orgasms as medical treatment, then go home to wives they believed had no sexual desires whatsoever. The mental gymnastics required is mind-boggling. Some women clearly understood what was happening, even if they couldn't say it out loud. Diary entries from that time hint at the truth. One anonymous woman wrote in 1892, "My weekly appointments with Dr. Harrison have quite restored my spirits. I find myself looking forward to Thursday afternoons with great anticipation." Another noted, "The treatment, though strange, provides relief unlike any tonic or medicine." Women would recommend their doctors to friends, creating networks of patients who all received the same treatment. The medical establishment's blindness to female sexuality had serious consequences beyond hysteria treatment. Doctors performed clitoridectomies to cure masturbation. They burned the clitoris with acid to prevent self-abuse. Dr. Isaac Baker Brown, president of the Medical Society of London, removed the clitorises of patients as young as 10 to treat hysteria. He was eventually kicked out of the medical society, but only because he operated without permission, not because the procedure itself was questioned. Meanwhile, the hysteria business boomed. By 1915, American doctors were earning an estimated $18 million per year from hysteria treatments, over $450 million in today's money. Manufacturers produced increasingly complicated devices. The Vibrator from 1908 came with multiple attachments for treating various female complaints. The Pulsicon hand crank model from 1890 promised relief without electricity. Some devices were built into furniture, special treatment chairs, with built-in vibrating mechanisms. The beginning of the end came with Freud. While his theories were deeply wrong, Freud at least said that women had sexual desires. He recognized that hysteria symptoms often had psychological rather than physical causes. By the 1920s, the American Psychiatric Association was moving away from hysteria as a diagnosis. But the real final blow came from an unexpected source: stag films. In the 1920s, early pornographic films began showing women using vibrators for clearly sexual purposes. Suddenly, the medical device that had been advertised in respectable magazines became associated with sexuality. Vibrators disappeared from doctors' offices almost overnight. The Sears catalog dropped them by 1925. What had been a common medical treatment became forbidden to talk about. Doctors quietly stopped doing pelvic massage, and the vibrators gathering dust in medical cabinets were quietly thrown away. The hysteria diagnosis officially disappeared from medical texts in 1952, but its effects continued. Women reporting real medical concerns were still dismissed as hysterical or emotional. The term became a catch-all for ignoring women's experiences. It wasn't until the 1960s and the work of researchers like Masters and Johnson that female sexuality was properly studied. They discovered what those Victorian women knew but couldn't say: that the hysterical paroxysm doctors had been causing for centuries was simply an orgasm. Looking back, the entire episode seems almost impossible to believe. How could trained medical professionals not recognize an orgasm? How could they do clearly sexual acts while believing they were purely medical? The answer lies in the power of cultural blindness. Victorian society's complete denial of female sexuality created a reality where doctors could literally give women orgasms all day long without recognizing what they were doing. Dr. Rachel Maines, who spent years researching this history, noted the irony. Victorian doctors were accidentally providing the only sexual satisfaction many women got while believing they were treating a disease caused by lack of sexual satisfaction. The women who lined up for treatment knew something their doctors didn't: that hysterical paroxysm was the bright spot in lives otherwise empty of sexual pleasure. The numbers are huge. Over the 70-plus years of peak hysteria treatment, 1850 to 1920, millions of women received regular pelvic massage. In major cities, some women visited their doctors weekly for decades. If we carefully estimate that 10% of adult women received treatment and they averaged 20 sessions each, that's tens of millions of medically given orgasms, all done by doctors who had no idea what they were doing. This history matters because it shows how completely medical practice can be twisted by cultural assumptions. These weren't fringe practitioners. They were the most respected doctors of their time, trained at the finest medical schools, following accepted rules. Yet, they were so blinded by their culture's denial of female sexuality that they couldn't recognize the obvious truth literally at their fingertips. So the next time someone dismisses women's health concerns as hysteria, remember this. For centuries, the medical establishment was so ignorant of women's bodies that they accidentally invented vibrators while trying to treat a made-up disease. They were so convinced that women had no sexual desires that they couldn't recognize an orgasm when they caused one. The treatment of hysteria remains one of medical history's most bizarre chapters, when doctors prescribed exactly what women needed while having absolutely no idea what they were doing. What's the most shocking part of this history to you? The medical ignorance, the cultural blindness, or the fact that vibrators were once as common in doctors' offices as stethoscopes? Let me know in the comments. And if you thought this was strange, wait for my next video: Why Victorian Women Ate Arsenic for Beauty. Trust me, The lengths they went to for a pale complexion will terrify you. Remember to like and subscribe and be grateful for modern medicine that actually understands human anatomy. You've definitely earned that knowledge.